represent the riding of New Brunswick Southwest, a riding with many gun owners. We have at least 30 gun clubs, and we also have one of the busiest gun dealerships in Canada. For the owners, guns can mean recreation and sometimes a way to put food on the table. For the clubs, sport shooting enhances socializing among those who admire craftsmanship in weapons and accuracy in targeting. For the dealerships, guns provide jobs. I have discussed this legislation with owners, club members, dealers, and other citizens all over my riding of New Brunswick Southwest. I also studied and completed a 2-day course in firearms handling, and I'm proud to say I now hold a firearms possession and acquisition license. I also talked with women's organizations, survivors of gun violence, and law enforcement officials. I spoke with the Minister for Public Safety. I brought his parliamentary secretary to my riding to speak directly with gun club presidents. Along the way, I discussed the bill with a good many members opposite, and I enjoyed going to a shooting range near Ottawa with the Outdoors Parliamentary Caucus. I have worked hard to fathom out this legislation and what it means for my constituents and other Canadians. I conclude the following. I support responsible gun owners. I cannot see that Bill C-71 hurts them. And so I support this legislation because it helps protect gun owners as it does all citizens. My riding, with its good, responsible gun owners, is considered a safe area. But Fredericton and Moncton were also traditionally considered safe areas too. And we all remember the headlines about the tragic shootings in Fredericton in August of this year and in Moncton in June 2014. It can happen so quickly when guns fall into the wrong hands. Yes, responsible people should be able to keep their guns without undue hindrance. But good people should be able to live freely in cities, towns, and villages without undue risk from gun-carrying criminals or people who have threatened or inflicted harm on others. Let us all remember the shocking number of tormented souls among us who, even though showing signs of mental difficulty, got hold of guns and committed suicide. Whether it's mental health, criminality, or threatening behavior, we should be able to double-check for dangers. This bill is not a new handgun ban. It is not a long gun registry. In large part, it is not new, period. This is a commitment. There is a commitment in this legislation not to reinstate the long gun registry. A number of its main features existed before. We lived with those regulations for a long time, and they protected lives. Then the previous government took them away. Since that time, for various reasons, gun-related deaths in Canada have sharply increased, and so has the number of female victims of violent crimes with a firearm present. Recreating and strengthening sensible legislation can put us back on a better track. For example, authorities will once again be able to require a permit for transporting restricted and prohibited weapons. This does not affect ordinary guns, only those on the higher side of danger. In another restored regulation, the seller of a firearm will need to verify the purchaser's possession and acquisition license. This will take a brief phone call. Responsible sellers and buyers will not object to that, nor will they protest legislation that has in decades past required firearms vendors to record what they sold. The existing law already enables those granting a firearms license to consider an applicant's criminal offenses or mental illness associated with violence or other history of violence, but only for the last 5 years. Bill C-71 allows taking account of the person's earlier history. That is a sensible change. It derives from a private member's bill put forward by a former Conservative MP. Oh, thank you. And this legislation incorporates other amendments from other parties in this House. I hope we can continue to put public safety over partisanship, and I am sure none of us want to hurt good people who own guns. But neither do we want guns in the wrong hands to hurt good people. When all is said and done, this is a good bill for responsible gun owners. At times, Strident voices from here and there have tried to paint too many responsible gun owners as villains. Sensible legislation can reassure the public that we're taking reasonable measures to keep guns in good hands, and that common sense is prevailing. Madam Speaker, I will be splitting my time with the member from Oakville, North Burlington, and I support this legislation. Thank you.
Questions and comments?
Conestoga.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank my colleague for her presentation this morning. Madam Speaker, in my area, I have a number of farmers who need to use guns. I have hunters, I have sport shooters, and sport shooters obviously go to the shooting ranges. And so this summer I decided I would go to 2 of my shooting ranges in my area and learn a bit about sport shooting. I have a PAL myself, but don't know much about sport shooting. So when I went there, Madam Speaker, I was impressed with the attention to detail that these clubs give to following the rules, to following safety guidelines, to being 100% sure that people who use these guns are adequately trained. They're more than happy, Madam Speaker, to follow the rules and to make sure that guns do not fall into the wrong hands, and to make sure that the background checks are done. But what they object to, Madam Speaker, is something like Bill C-71, which does create an extra burden on legitimate fire owners, and they're happy to accept the burden if they could be assured that it would actually increase public safety. So they were convinced, Madam Speaker, that Bill C-71 is a public relations exercise intended to convince the public that this will somehow increase safety, when in reality, all it does is target the legitimate gun owners and does nothing for criminals, violent criminals, and gangs. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for New Brunswick Southwest.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for his comments. Certainly when we're looking at enhanced background checks, they are critically important. I know from experience what the questions that were asked regarding a 5-year background check, and I was pleased with that. I think going deeper presents an opportunity for not only for public safety but also prevention from self-harm. We heard from other speakers earlier about the risk of suicide, and that 80% of suicides are actually gun-related. There are people that should not have guns, and I think that's, to me, is one of the most important pieces of the legislation that we're trying to put forward here. Thank you.
Comments? The honourable member for Medicine Hat, Cardston Warner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague across the way for her speech this morning. I want to provide some context to the misinformation that was contained in your speech, in her speech, Madam Speaker, as well as the rhetoric that's been rampant from the other side. There's no evidence ever been produced, and I've asked for it, on risks associated with the authority to transport, the ATTs. Not one case has ever been presented that I've asked for repeatedly that shows that law-abiding gun owners, when they transport their firearms from a gun club to a gun shop or to a sporting competition anywhere, have ever presented an issue. That's number one. Number two, the background checks. The 5-year background checks, Madam Speaker, are not limited to 5 years. They go the entire history of an individual currently. My question to the member, Madam Speaker, on your urgence is to, I dealt with, I came to this member's riding in the summer, and I spoke to the same people she spoke to a couple days after I was there. I heard very loud and clear that they are not in favor of this gun legislation. I'm wondering what this member has heard from her community at large in regards to C-71 and their disapproval of this legislation that doesn't target criminals.
Members to make their point and ask the question, only because during a 5-minute there's not a lot of time, and so hopefully those members will have a chance when they do their speeches. The honourable member for New Brunswick Southwest has an opportunity to respond.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My only regret was when the member opposite was in my riding is that he did not stop in for a visit. In terms of what the member opposite heard in my riding, I have heard concerns. I mean, certainly there is the rhetoric that goes back and forth, and I think that's why we need to be looking at issues as critical as this in the most bipartisan way. That, to me, is what's important. I know when I've spoken with the gun club presidents, there is the fear of what's next. What I'm offering for reassurance is that I've done my homework. I went out, I took the firearms course, I did my licensing. I talk with the largest gun dealer in Atlantic Canada every single week. I know the concerns. I've asked those questions. I put them forward to the minister. And I think that's one of the important part of being a parliamentarian. And I do feel reassured, looking at the legislation, that it is not going to affect the average gun owner in my riding, and who I have the utmost respect for. Thank you.